When the new intern accidentally left confidential merger documents on his desk, the cleaning woman glanced at the papers and immediately recognized the flawed strategy that would cost the company millions. She had two choices: stay invisible or reveal that she'd orchestrated similar deals worth billions during her previous life. Welcome to Interesting Human Stories. Before we dive into this remarkable tale of corporate power, devastating loss, and hidden wisdom, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that leadership experience never truly disappears, hit that subscribe button. These stories remind us that greatness can be found in the most unexpected places. The elevator climbed silently to the 35th floor of the Meridian Financial Tower at exactly 10:47 p.m., carrying Rebecca Williams and her cleaning cart loaded with supplies, disinfectants, and the tools of her trade. At 52, she moved with the efficient rhythm of someone who'd been cleaning office buildings for 3 years, her uniform crisp despite the late hour, her manner professional but invisible. The floor housed the offices of Peterson & Associates, a mid-sized investment firm that managed portfolios worth approximately $2.8 billion. Rebecca knew these numbers not because they were posted anywhere, but because she'd spent enough nights cleaning around financial documents, annual reports, and strategy presentations to understand exactly what kind of business occupied these marble-floored corridors. She began her routine in the reception area, dusting the mahogany furniture and cleaning the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of downtown Chicago's financial district. The work was methodical, peaceful, and gave Rebecca time to think, something she'd learned to value during the quiet hours between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. The executive offices on the East Wing were always her final stop, saved for last because they required the most attention and because the partners often worked late, sometimes not leaving until well after midnight. Tonight, the floor was empty except for the hum of computers left running and the soft glow of city lights filtering through expensive window treatments. What the employees of Peterson & Associates didn't know about their night cleaning lady was that Rebecca Williams had once been Rebecca Catherine Morrison, CEO of Consolidated Industries International, a Fortune 500 manufacturing conglomerate with $47 billion in annual revenue and operations spanning 6 continents. Rebecca's rise to corporate leadership had been meteoric by any standard. Starting as a junior analyst at a small consulting firm in Detroit, she demonstrated an intuitive understanding of complex business systems that had caught the attention of senior partners and Fortune 500 clients alike. By age 35, she'd been recruited as VP of Strategy for Consolidated Industries, a struggling manufacturing company that had lost its competitive edge to overseas competitors. By 42, she was CEO, having orchestrated a complete transformation of the company's operations, supply chains, and market positioning. Under Rebecca's leadership, Consolidated Industries had grown from a regional manufacturer facing bankruptcy into a global powerhouse. She'd negotiated acquisitions worth over $15 billion, restructured supply chains across 3 continents, and implemented efficiency improvements that had saved the company hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Her success had made her a fixture on magazine covers, a sought-after speaker at business conferences, and one of the most respected CEOs in American industry. Fortune had called her the turnaround artist who rebuilt American manufacturing. Harvard Business School had written case studies about her strategic decisions. The president had appointed her to economic advisory committees that shaped national trade policy, but corporate success at that level came with costs that weren't visible in quarterly reports or stock prices. Rebecca had worked 18-hour days for years, traveled constantly, and gradually lost touch with everything outside the narrow world of boardrooms, investor calls, and strategic planning sessions. The end had come not from business failure but from an accounting scandal that had destroyed Rebecca's career and reputation in a matter of weeks. The company's CFO, working with the head of international operations, had been systematically inflating revenue figures through fraudulent transactions with shell companies overseas. Rebecca had known nothing about the fraud, but as CEO, she'd been held responsible for the culture that had allowed it to flourish. The SEFO heeft de goalste bester in de stupperforker, werfen ze het original bijzonder champion for Matsulmolthus, Gishen Joechther Journs, Trofo en Nadixegam Vestem Lightly like. But what is blinders tribeke extrater sebnorag some foreign chi, you in James, Kryber des Torns, when true should naded empelodning. But dus dift of duding stiply churret with his wich travel all BC empersof. Trebek and Otis worst retroffic sullen overrated Joe Fitzgerald when the VC underrated bearing gim persetter o York all that as this yeo got rated and to conner last unclimatikas mere, dis epity dur current urban mekis trach.
Criminal charges against Rebecca had eventually been dropped due to lack of evidence of personal involvement, but the civil penalties had been catastrophic. Investors had filed class action lawsuits seeking billions in damages. The company had declared bankruptcy. Rebecca's reputation in corporate America had been destroyed beyond repair. The psychological impact had been worse than the financial cost. Rebecca had spent 20 years building a company and a reputation, only to watch both crumble due to decisions made by people she'd trusted. The betrayal by her CFO and operations chief had been personal as well as professional. These were people she'd mentored, promoted, and considered friends. Depression had followed quickly, along with anxiety, insomnia, and the gradual realization that her entire identity had been tied to her corporate role. Without the title, the office, the constant demands of executive leadership, Rebecca had struggled to understand who she was or what her life meant. The years following Consolidated Industries' collapse had been a slow descent from corporate prominence to near poverty. Rebecca's legal bills had consumed her savings, her stock options had become worthless, and her severance package had been eliminated by bankruptcy proceedings. More damaging than the financial cost had been the professional isolation. No major corporation would hire someone associated with a massive accounting scandal, regardless of personal culpability. Executive search firms had stopped returning her calls. Board positions that had once been offered routinely were no longer available. Rebecca had tried consulting, but potential clients were wary of the reputational risk of associating with her name. She'd attempted to start her own business, but banks wouldn't provide loans to someone with her recent financial history. Even teaching positions at business schools had been denied due to concerns about negative publicity. The apartment in Lincoln Park, the vacation home in Aspen, the comfortable lifestyle that executive compensation had provided, all of it had been sold to pay legal bills and basic living expenses. Rebecca had moved to a studio apartment in a working-class neighborhood, traded her BMW for a used Honda, and begun the humbling process of looking for employment that didn't require stellar references from previous employers. The job with Meridian Cleaning Services had been one of the few opportunities available to someone with Rebecca's complicated employment history. Night shift office cleaning paid $15 an hour, required no references beyond basic criminal background checks, and offered the anonymity that Rebecca had come to prefer. 3 years of night shift cleaning had given Rebecca a unique perspective on corporate America from the bottom up. She'd worked in law firms, accounting practices, consulting companies, and investment houses, observing the daily operations of businesses from the perspective of someone completely invisible to management. The experience had been educational in ways she hadn't expected. Rebecca had learned to see corporate inefficiencies that executives missed, communication breakdowns that cost companies money, and strategic mistakes that were obvious from an outsider's perspective but invisible to people trapped inside organizational hierarchies. At Peterson & Associates, she'd observed several operational problems that were slowly undermining the firm's profitability. Their document management system was chaotic, leading to billing errors and missed deadlines. Their technology infrastructure was outdated, causing productivity losses that added up to significant opportunity costs. Most importantly, their client acquisition strategy was fundamentally flawed, focusing on volume rather than long-term relationship building. But Rebecca had learned to keep her observations to herself. Cleaning ladies didn't offer strategic advice to investment firms. Former CEOs cleaning offices after midnight didn't share insights about operational efficiency with people who saw them as part of the building's infrastructure. The merger documents had been left on the desk of Jason Mitchell, a 25-year-old intern who joined Peterson & Associates 6 months earlier as part of their analyst training program. Jason was bright, eager, and chronically disorganized, a combination that led to important documents being left scattered across his workspace after long days of financial modeling and client research. Rebecca had been cleaning Jason's office area when she'd noticed the stack of papers marked confidential merger analysis in red letters across the top. Professional curiosity, combined with years of experience in complex corporate transactions, had led her to glance at the executive summary while emptying Jason's trash can. The proposed deal was a merger between Peterson & Associates' largest client, Midwest Manufacturing, and a smaller competitor called Great Lakes Industrial. The transaction was valued at $847 million and was intended to create operational synergies that would justify the premium being paid for Great Lakes assets. Rebecca had recognized the flawed strategy immediately. She'd seen similar deals during her tenure at Consolidated Industries, and she knew exactly why this particular structure would fail to deliver the promised benefits. The synergies were overstated, the integration costs were underestimated, and the cultural differences between the two companies had been completely ignored. More concerning was the financing structure, which relied heavily on debt that would strain Midwest Manufacturing's cash flow during the integration period. Rebecca had seen companies destroy themselves with similar leverage transactions, and she'd recognized the warning signs in the financial projections scattered across Jason's desk. For the next 3 nights, Rebecca had been distracted during her cleaning routine, thinking about the merger documents and the catastrophic mistakes she'd identified. Part of her wanted to ignore what she'd seen. It wasn't her company, her client, or her responsibility to prevent other people's strategic errors. But another part of her, the part that had spent 20 years in executive leadership, couldn't ignore the knowledge that hundreds of jobs would be lost and millions of dollars wasted if the merger proceeded as planned. The companies involved weren't abstract financial entities, they were employers, communities, families whose livelihoods would be affected by decisions made in conference rooms by people who didn't understand the operational realities of manufacturing businesses. Rebecca had wrestled with the ethical implications of her situation. Did she have a responsibility to share her expertise, even though doing so would expose her background and potentially cost her the anonymity she'd come to value? Was it fair to let a flawed deal proceed when she had knowledge that could prevent significant financial and human costs? The decision point had come on Thursday night when she'd overheard Jason on a phone call with his girlfriend expressing anxiety about the merger analysis he was supposed to present to the partners the following morning. "I think there's something wrong with the numbers," Jason had been saying, "but I can't figure out what it is. The senior associates are too busy to help, and if I screw this up, my career here is over." Rebecca had waited until Jason had finished his phone call and begun packing up his desk for the evening. As he'd been preparing to leave, she'd approached his workspace with her cleaning supplies and had spoken quietly. "Excuse me, Mr. Mitchell, I couldn't help but notice you seem stressed about your presentation." Jason had looked up, surprised. In 6 months of working at Peterson & Associates, he'd rarely spoken to the cleaning staff beyond basic pleasantries. "Oh, hi. Yes, it's a complex deal analysis, nothing you'd be interested in." "Actually," Rebecca had said carefully, "I might be able to help. I have some experience with merger analysis." Jason had smiled politely, the way people do when service workers try to engage in conversations beyond their perceived expertise. "That's kind of you, but this is pretty technical stuff. Corporate finance, operational synergies, that kind of thing." Rebecca had made a decision that would change both of their lives. The Great Lakes industrial deal. "You're underestimating integration costs by about 40%. And the projected synergies assume operational efficiencies that are impossible to achieve given the cultural differences between manufacturing-focused and distribution-focused organizations." Jason had stared at her, his expression shifting from polite dismissal to genuine surprise. "How do you know about the Great Lakes deal? That information is confidential." "The documents were on your desk," Rebecca had replied, "and I know about merger analysis because I've negotiated transactions worth over $15 billion. The conversation that had followed had been surreal for both participants. Jason, trying to process the fact that his building's cleaning lady was offering sophisticated business advice, and Rebecca speaking about corporate strategy for the first time in 3 years. Rebecca had walked Jason through the fundamental flaws in the merger analysis, explaining why the projected cost savings were unrealistic, how the debt structure would create cash flow problems, and what alternative strategies would better serve both companies' long-term interests. "You seem to know a lot about this," Jason had said, his skepticism gradually being replaced by recognition that Rebecca's analysis was more sophisticated than anything he'd encountered in business school. "I used to work in corporate development," Rebecca had replied, which was technically true if incomplete. Jason had pressed for more details, and gradually Rebecca had revealed more of her background. Former CEO, Fortune 500 company, 20 years of experience in complex transactions, the accounting scandal that had ended her career. "Rebecca Morrison," Jason had said suddenly, recognition dawning. "You're Rebecca Morrison, the CEO of Consolidated Industries. I wrote a case study about your company in my MBA program." Rebecca had nodded, waiting for the judgment, the questions about the fraud, the assumptions about her culpability that had defined her interactions with business professionals for 3 years. Instead, Jason had said, "Your turnaround strategy for Consolidated Industries was brilliant. We studied it as an example of successful corporate transformation. What happened with the accounting scandal was terrible, but everyone knew you weren't involved in the fraud. What had started as a chance encounter had evolved into an unlikely partnership." Over the following week, Rebecca had worked with Jason to completely restructure the merger analysis, applying her decades of experience to identify problems and develop solutions that the original analysis had missed. Working together after hours, they developed an alternative proposal that addressed the fundamental flaws in the original deal structure. Instead of a debt-heavy merger that would strain both companies, they designed a strategic partnership that would achieve the operational benefits without the financial risks. Rebecca had been careful to let Jason present their work as his own analysis, understanding that her involvement would raise questions that could complicate both of their situations. But her influence was evident in the sophistication of the recommendations and the depth of operational understanding that no recent MBA graduate could have developed independently. Jason's presentation to the Peterson and Associates partners had been a revelation. The senior staff who'd expected a routine merger analysis from an intern had instead received a comprehensive strategic assessment that identified fundamental problems in a deal worth nearly $1 billion. "This is graduate-level work," managing partner David Peterson had said after Jason's presentation. "Where did you develop this level of expertise in operational integration?" Jason had deflected the question skillfully, crediting additional research and consultation with unnamed industry contacts. But privately, he'd begun advocating for Rebecca to be formally involved in Peterson and Associates' strategic work. The revelation of Rebecca's true background had spread carefully through Peterson and Associates' senior management. David Peterson had done his own research into Rebecca's corporate history, eventually confirming that their night cleaning lady was indeed the former CEO who'd built one of America's most successful manufacturing companies. The conversation between Rebecca and David Peterson had taken place in his corner office on a Saturday afternoon, when the building was empty except for weekend security. Rebecca had arrived in her cleaning uniform, but the discussion had been between equals, two experienced business leaders discussing corporate strategy and career transitions. "I have to ask," Peterson had said, "what's a former Fortune 500 CEO doing cleaning office buildings?" Rebecca had explained her situation honestly. The legal bills, the professional blacklisting, the depression and financial ruin that had followed the collapse of Consolidated Industries. She'd also explained her choice to work in anonymity rather than continuing to fight for rehabilitation in corporate America. "But you clearly haven't lost your strategic thinking abilities," Peterson had observed. "The work you did with Jason was exceptional. Have you considered returning to consulting or executive roles?" "Nobody will hire me," Rebecca had replied. "The association with the accounting scandal makes me unemployable at any serious level, regardless of my actual involvement." Peterson had made an offer that would change Rebecca's trajectory again. "What if they didn't know who you were? What if you worked under a different name, with references that couldn't be checked?" 3 months later, Peterson and Associates had hired Rebecca Williams as a senior consultant, specializing in operational due diligence for merger and acquisition transactions. Her background had been listed as extensive experience in manufacturing and operations consulting, with references that David Peterson had provided personally. The transformation had been remarkable. Rebecca had moved from cleaning office buildings at night to developing strategic recommendations for investment transactions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Her insights, developed through decades of executive experience, had quickly made her one of Peterson and Associates' most valuable consultants. The Great Lakes industrial transaction had been restructured based on Rebecca's recommendations, ultimately saving Midwest manufacturing approximately $200 million in integration costs and preventing what would have been a disastrous leveraged buyout. Other clients had begun requesting her involvement in their strategic analyses. Jason Mitchell had been promoted to senior analyst, with his career trajectory significantly enhanced by his association with Rebecca's work. He'd become her unofficial partner, handling the client-facing responsibilities while Rebecca provided the strategic insights that informed their recommendations. But Rebecca had been careful to maintain some distance from the public aspects of her new role. She avoided industry conferences, declined interview requests, and worked primarily on analysis rather than client presentations. The anonymity that had once been forced upon her had become a chosen form of protection. 6 months after Jason had found those merger documents on his desk, Rebecca had been reflecting on the unexpected path that had brought her from corporate disgrace to renewed purpose. The work at Peterson and Associates wasn't the same as running a Fortune 500 company, but it was meaningful in ways that her previous executive role had sometimes lacked. Instead of managing thousands of employees and billions in revenue, she was helping smaller companies make better strategic decisions. Instead of being responsible to shareholders and board members, she was accountable to clients who trusted her expertise to protect their businesses and their employees' livelihoods. The financial compensation, while substantial for a consulting role, was modest compared to executive packages she'd once received. But Rebecca had discovered that money beyond basic security and comfort had been less important than she'd realized when she'd been earning it. More significantly, she'd found peace in work that allowed her to use her expertise without the political pressures and public scrutiny that had characterized her CEO years. The accounting scandal that had destroyed her first career had taught her the difference between reputation and identity, between external recognition and personal satisfaction. Rebecca Williams continues to work as a senior consultant for Peterson & Associates, where she's become known for her exceptional ability to identify operational risks and strategic opportunities in complex business transactions. Her colleagues know her as someone with unusual expertise for someone without an obvious executive background, but few have probed deeply into her past. The clients she serves, mid-sized manufacturing companies, family businesses considering acquisitions, private equity firms evaluating investments, benefit from strategic insights developed through decades of Fortune 500 leadership experience. They receive advice that would normally cost hundreds of thousands of dollars from major consulting firms, delivered by someone who's actually implemented similar strategies at the highest levels of corporate America. Jason Mitchell has completed his MBA and been promoted to vice president, with Rebecca serving as his unofficial mentor. Their partnership has become one of Peterson & Associates' most successful client relationships, though Jason remains one of the few people who knows Rebecca's complete background. Occasionally, Rebecca encounters former colleagues from her Consolidated Industries days, people who recognize her name or remember her from business conferences. These encounters are handled discreetly, with mutual understanding that everyone deserves the opportunity to rebuild their professional life after setbacks. The cleaning cart that once carried her supplies through Meridian Financial Tower has been replaced by a briefcase filled with financial analyses and strategic recommendations. But Rebecca remembers those late-night hours when she observed corporate America from the perspective of someone invisible to management, and those insights continue to inform her understanding of how businesses really function. The woman who once commanded boardrooms filled with Fortune 500 executives now works quietly behind the scenes, helping smaller companies avoid the strategic mistakes that can destroy businesses and livelihoods. She's learned that leadership doesn't require a corner office or a prestigious title. Sometimes it just requires the wisdom to know when to speak up and the courage to share expertise that can make a difference. Rebecca Morrison may have lost her corporate empire, but Rebecca Williams has found something more sustainable, the satisfaction of using hard-earned experience to help others succeed, one strategic decision at a time. So now I ask you, have you ever encountered unexpected business expertise in someone whose current role didn't reflect their background? Someone whose careful observations suggested experience beyond their apparent position? Someone who chose anonymity over recognition because they'd learned that impact matters more than status? Share their story in the comments. Because here at Interesting Human Stories, we believe that true leadership isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about having the wisdom to recognize problems and the courage to offer solutions regardless of your current circumstances. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it. Help us honor the hidden leaders among us who continue making a difference long after their official leadership roles have ended. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, the person cleaning your office, serving your coffee, or working quietly in the background might be carrying more business wisdom than anyone in the boardroom.